Chief Harold Vance spent years pushing around anyone who couldn't fight back, but he crossed the line the day he went after my sister Mira Donovan. Her small cafe became his personal target as he wrecked her counters, planted fake violations, and acted like she had no one to defend her. People in Belmont stayed quiet because Vance controlled every badge in town. Then one night, a man with a calm stare walked into her cafe. Adrian Lucero, a Mafia boss who had been out of sight for years, stepped in for a reason he kept to himself, and nothing in Belmont stayed the same after that. Mira unlocked her cafe before sunrise, hoping to get ahead of another long day. She moved slowly through the quiet space, still seeing the mess Vance left behind during his last visit. Broken items sat in a pile near the back door, reminders of how much damage he caused in just a few minutes. She wiped the counter again, not because it needed cleaning, but because it helped her stay focused. Bills sat under a paperweight, growing heavier each week as the harassment pushed customers away. She kept telling herself she would not let him force her out. Her small staff arrived one by one, carrying tired looks after weeks of surprise inspections. They whispered about the patrol cars parked outside before pretending everything was normal. Mira reassured them with a steady voice. Even though she felt the same uncertainty, she noticed their hands shake when the door opened, showing how much Vance had gotten into their heads. She reminded them to serve whoever came in, and to avoid engaging with officers unless necessary. Keeping the cafe open meant keeping morale together, even when everyone felt watched from every angle, including the alley behind the kitchen. The sound of Vance's cruiser echoed down the street, sending a quiet ripple through the cafe. He parked directly in front, blocking the entrance and making sure everyone saw who held authority. His steps were slow and heavy as he entered, scanning the room with an attitude that showed he enjoyed every second of control. Mira stood at the counter, steadying herself for whatever he planned next. Without saying anything, he moved toward the kitchen, flipping items and pointing to random equipment as if it belonged in a report. She stood still, knowing he wanted a reaction he would use against her. Vance pulled out his clipboard and started marking violations he invented on the spot. He pointed at a perfectly clean fridge door, then scribbled something down as if it proved his point. He took photos of clean plates and rearranged jars to make the shelves look disorganized before capturing more images. Every action felt calculated to ruin her business. Little by little, Mira watched each movement, understanding the damage wasn't physical anymore but aimed at her reputation. By the time he finished, the cafe felt smaller, as though he drained every ounce of calm from the morning atmosphere. Once Vance finished, he created a scene by knocking over a stack of takeaway cups, pretending it happened by accident. The staff froze, unsure if they should clean it or wait for Mira to respond. Vance gave the place one last long look and walked out with a smirk that suggested he had more planned. As the door closed, Mira knelt to pick up the cups herself. She breathed steadily and reminded her staff that the cafe would keep running, no matter what he tried. The employees exchanged worried glances, knowing each day seemed harder than the last. Customers passing by hesitated before stepping inside, noticing the cruiser parked out front. Some avoided eye contact, afraid that being seen near Mira's cafe would attract attention from the chief. Regulars who once filled the tables now stayed away, leaving the place quieter than ever. Mira understood their fear, though it hurt to watch her loyal customers disappear. She filled cups, cleaned tables, and kept the menu simple to reduce the workload. Every empty chair reminded her of how quickly Vance's intimidation spread through the neighborhood, turning a friendly cafe into a place people whispered about in private. Her teenage son Nolan arrived after school and noticed the damage immediately. He quietly gathered broken pieces from the floor near the storage room and placed them into a box. Mira watched him work with a careful focus that showed he was trying to help without adding to her stress. She guided him to tasks he could manage, like wiping tables or stacking clean plates. Nolan understood more than she wished he did, sensing the pressure on her shoulders. He stayed close, wanting to protect her in small ways, even though he couldn't challenge the man responsible for the chaos. Later that evening, Mira sat at her office desk, going through the cafe's financial records. The numbers made her uneasy as she realized how quickly the harassment drained her savings. She highlighted overdue bills, insurance warnings, and repair costs from Vance's visits. The cafe had always been steady under her care, but the past few months threatened everything she built. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine a future where business returned to normal. Papers cluttered the surface, showing the weight of every challenge she faced alone. She forced herself to keep going, believing something had to change soon. Across Belmont, business owners whispered about Vance's new target. Word spread through hardware shops, diners, and small grocery stores about the cafe owner who refused to pay his protection fees. Most felt sorry for Mira, but none wanted to stand up for her. They knew how Vance operated and feared he would turn on them next if they got involved. Some avoided her entirely to avoid being noticed by his officers. Mira became a cautionary name in quiet conversations, used to warn others about resisting the chief. She stayed unaware of how much gossip surrounded her daily struggles. Customers from neighboring blocks talked privately about the situation, but no one offered support. Mira became an example of why people kept their heads down in Belmont. Officers lingered near her café, making residents feel unsafe even walking past. Some neighbors dropped off kind words or small treats in secret, leaving them at her side door when no one was watching. These gestures touched her, but they also reminded her how isolated she was in her fight. She tried staying strong, knowing the chief wanted her to break under pressure. She refused to give him that satisfaction. Mira paused during cleanup and looked at an old photo of her late husband on the back wall. The picture showed him standing proudly in front of the cafe on opening day. Memories came back of how he used to protect her from threats, always willing to confront whoever tried to harm their business. Losing him left a space that no one could fill. She wondered how he would handle Vance and whether he would tell her to keep going or step back for safety. The thought of him gave her strength she needed to face another day of uncertainty. To clear her mind, Mira stepped outside into the cool evening air. The street looked quiet, but she noticed patrol cars rolling slowly past her cafe. Their presence felt intentional, like a reminder that someone was always watching. She pulled her jacket tighter and checked the locks on her doors. People walking by kept their distance, unwilling to be seen near her. Mira stood still for a moment and tried focusing on the day's small wins. She reminded herself that she survived another round of intimidation. She headed back inside, determined not to close early, despite the tension outside. Inside, the atmosphere returned to its usual warmth as she prepared the cafe for the dinner crowd. She set pastries in the display case and brewed fresh coffee. Each task helped ease her thoughts. Still, she heard every passing siren louder than normal and noticed shadows under the windows more than she should. The staff did their best to act normal, even though they glanced toward the entrance every time the bell rang. Customers arrived slowly, choosing seats near the corners, unsure if trouble might start again. Mira kept moving, giving the place a sense of routine despite her worries. Near closing time, Mira swept the floor while the last customers left. The cafe finally felt quiet enough for her to breathe. She wiped down the counters and turned off several lights to save energy. The smell of fresh coffee still lingered, reminding her why she held on to this place. She carried a tray of cleaned mugs to the back when she heard the door open. She expected another officer or an impatient inspector. Instead, quiet footsteps approached with calm confidence. She looked up and saw a tall man she didn't recognize walking toward the counter with steady purpose. The man scanned the cafe, paying close attention to the broken items and scuffed surfaces. His eyes softened when he noticed Mira standing behind the counter, trying to hide how tired she felt. He approached with a steady presence that felt different from the officers she dealt with daily. Something about him suggested he understood more than she said. She served him without asking questions, sensing he came with his own reasons. As he sat down, he observed the cafe in silence, taking in every detail. Mira couldn't tell what he wanted, but his arrival marked the start of something Belmont didn't see coming. Mira scrubbed the counter with careful motions, trying to restore order after another long day. The cafe felt calmer with fewer customers, and the quiet helped her regain focus. She kept noticing the stranger sitting near the window, observing the place with steady attention rather than judgment. His presence didn't add pressure the way officers did. Instead, it brought a strange sense of stability she didn't know she needed. She placed chairs on tables one by one, glancing his way every so often. Something told her he wasn't there for simple food or coffee, but she couldn't guess his purpose. She continued wiping surfaces when the stranger rose from his seat and walked toward the door. He gave the room one last scan, studying the broken sign near the entrance and the cracked frame near the register. His expression carried understanding rather than curiosity. When he stepped outside, Mira watched him through the window as he paused on the sidewalk, looking up at the cafe's faded logo. He stayed there longer than she expected, like someone recalling an old memory. She didn't call out or follow, but she sensed he already knew the cafe meant more than it appeared. Outside, Adrian Lucero remained still, letting the cool night steady his thoughts. Seeing the cafe brought back images he had pushed deep down, tied to a night years ago when Mira's husband shielded him during a raid that changed everything. Adrian hadn't planned on returning to any world connected to that memory, but the struggle in Mira's eyes pulled him back. He walked to his car without hurry, sitting behind the wheel while replaying the damage he noticed inside. The smashed items, the scattered papers, and the forced fear all pointed to the same type of pressure he once commanded. As he sat in the quiet street, Adrian felt a slow fire rise inside him, not from anger alone, but from recognition. He understood the pattern. He knew how people like Chief Vance operated. Adrian turned on his phone and scrolled through contacts he had stopped using long ago. This wasn't supposed to be his fight, yet something anchored him to Mira's situation. He sent a message to a former associate, asking for a quick background check on the chief. Then he leaned back and waited, knowing the information would not take long to surface considering Vance's reputation. The response came with a long list of complaints, internal warnings, and uninvestigated reports. Adrian read each line carefully, piecing together how Vance built power through intimidation and connections. It didn't surprise him that people stayed silent because silence protected them. He locked his phone and stared at the darkened cafe again, realizing Mira had been facing this on her own for far too long. He made a decision without announcing it to anyone. Before driving away, he glanced at the security cameras on nearby buildings, noting how easily the chief's movements could be tracked if done correctly. Before we continue and see what choices Adrian makes next, take a moment to support the story by liking the video, subscribing if you enjoy these narratives, and sharing where you're watching from. It helps more than you know. Early the next morning, Adrian woke before sunrise and returned to the cafe area. He parked across the street and observed the routine. He saw the same patrol car circling the block again and again, slowing near the entrance before completing another loop. The pattern reminded him too much of surveillance tactics he once used on enemies. He noticed how Mira unlocked the cafe with a careful pace, scanning her surroundings before stepping inside. Adrian watched silently from his car, reading the exhaustion in her posture. She moved like someone who expected trouble before the day even began. Once inside the cafe, Mira prepared the morning shift with her usual discipline. She brewed fresh coffee and arranged pastries in the display case, trying to start the day as normal as possible. Staff members arrived with worry written on their faces. They whispered about the patrol car outside, unsure how to handle the attention. Mira reminded them to focus on service and ignore the officers. She tried to sound confident, but none of them missed how her hands tightened around the coffee pot. The tension didn't fade. Every new sound from outside made them pause for just a second. Later that morning, Adrian stepped inside again, moving with quiet purpose. Customers looked up briefly but quickly turned away, unsure what to make of him. Mira nodded politely, though she seemed confused by his second visit so soon. Adrian chose a seat near the corner where he could see both the door and the windows. He didn't draw attention, but his presence shifted the room. The patrol car outside slowed once more, and Adrian's eyes followed it through the glass. Mira noticed his awareness and felt a strange sense of safety, even though she barely knew him. Mira served him coffee while wondering why he kept returning. She studied his calm posture and steady focus, realizing he carried himself like someone familiar with danger but not controlled by it. Adrian didn't seem uncomfortable in a place filled with tension. His eyes lingered on the broken portions of the decker, as if he understood what caused them. Mira didn't explain the full story, yet the cafe's condition already told him enough. She stepped back behind the counter, trying to understand why his presence made her feel less alone, even if only for a moment. Meanwhile, Adrian reached out to a former associate who still monitored information networks in the city. He asked for deeper records on Vance's activities, not just rumors. The associate sent files almost immediately, revealing bribes, hidden accounts, and incidents buried under paperwork. Adrian scrolled through everything, connecting loose ends with familiar patterns. He noticed names of businesses Vance targeted over the years and recognized the strategy of isolating and breaking the ones who resisted. These details painted a clear picture of a man who built power through quiet cruelty. Adrian's resolve strengthened with every line he read. That afternoon, Adrian walked past the cafe again to think through his next steps. He stood across the street, leaning against a lamppost while watching customers enter. Some looked relieved when they saw him nearby, though they didn't know who he was. He recognized fear in their behavior, the same fear people once showed toward him in his past life. Yet here his presence seemed to counter Vance's intimidation. Adrian didn't step inside this time, he just watched, ensuring Mira wasn't facing additional harassment that day. He knew Vance would react soon, and he needed to be ready. Vance heard from his officers that a stranger had been visiting the cafe multiple times in short succession. The chief grew suspicious and irritated, wondering who would dare involve themselves in his business. He ordered a patrol officer to take photos of Adrian and report back with anything suspicious. The officer followed the order, snapping pictures from across the street while trying not to be obvious. Vance studied the images and noticed Adrian's composed stance, which irritated him further. Something about the man's confidence bothered Vance, making him feel challenged in a way he wasn't used to. The next morning, Adrian parked farther from the cafe and continued watching from a distance. He saw the same officer circling the block and spotted subtle attempts to photograph him. He didn't change his behavior because he wanted the chief to feel uncertain. He walked toward the cafe during a slow hour, choosing a moment when the street was mostly empty. When he entered, Mira straightened immediately, sensing the shift his presence brought. Adrian focused on the details around him, making mental notes of how often officers checked the windows or slowed near the entrance throughout the day. Mira noticed how comfortable Adrian seemed in situations that made others anxious. He scanned the environment with purpose, not suspicion. His eyes reflected experience, like someone who understood how people in power operated. She wondered if he had law enforcement background, though something about him suggested he belonged to a different kind of world. She didn't ask questions. Instead, she prepared his order and placed it on the table. The cafe felt steadier when he was around. The officers outside didn't linger as long, and customers seemed more inclined to sit and enjoy their meals without rushing out in fear. Elsewhere in Belmont, Adrian met with a trusted friend who still worked quietly in private security. They sat inside a parked car behind an abandoned building where no one paid attention to comings and goings. Adrian explained what he observed at the cafe and the files he uncovered about the chief. His friend listened carefully and agreed to help monitor Vance's patterns. They discussed ways to gather evidence without causing issues that could fall back on Mira. Adrian emphasized that this wasn't about revenge, but about removing a threat that targeted innocent people. His friend nodded, understanding the gravity. Adrian returned to the cafe later that day with a more deliberate plan forming in his mind. He brought a small bag containing discreet security equipment. Without drawing attention, he installed one camera near the back alley and another above the storage entrance, using blind spots to keep them hidden. He didn't tell Mira yet because he wanted proof before worrying her with more problems. Once in place, the cameras would capture any suspicious activity from officers or associates Vance sent. This setup gave Adrian more control over the situation, allowing him to respond quickly if things escalated. When Mira discovered one of the new cameras near the back entrance, she paused in confusion. She hadn't installed anything new, and the placement looked too strategic to be random. She looked around the alley, trying to spot who might have put it there. Adrian stepped out from the corner, carrying a toolbox, and she realized he was responsible. Though she didn't understand why, she sensed it wasn't meant to invade her privacy. He explained just enough for her to know the cameras were for protection. She didn't protest, understanding that danger might be closer than she wanted to believe. To help her understand his involvement, Adrian told her about her late husband's role in his past. He explained how the man once shielded him during a violent raid, risking his own life without hesitation. Mira froze as she processed the memory of her husband's hidden connections. The revelation hit her with a mix of pride and sadness. She felt grateful someone remembered his bravery, especially someone with Adrian's reputation. The story connected them in an unexpected way, giving her a sense of comfort she hadn't felt since the harassment began. She realized Adrian wasn't protecting her out of obligation alone. The next morning, Vance returned with a new level of aggression. He arrived with 2 additional officers, making the visit feel more like a raid than an inspection. They spread out inside the cafe, interrupting customers and making the environment tense. They questioned people about unrelated matters and wrote down unnecessary notes. Mira tried to maintain order, but her staff felt overwhelmed. The officers blocked pathways and pushed aside chairs as if searching for something important. Mira watched them closely, recognizing the tactic meant to intimidate her into closing her doors. She held her ground, refusing to give in. Adrian watched the scene unfold from outside. He leaned against a wall near a nearby shop, analyzing the positioning of each officer and the angle of the patrol car. Vance's tactics didn't surprise him, but they confirmed how deeply the chief relied on fear to keep control. Adrian walked closer to the cafe, his expression steady as he approached the entrance. Customers inside noticed him through the window and relaxed slightly, sensing balance returning. When he stepped in, Vance's officers stiffened, unsure how to respond to his presence. Adrian didn't speak, but his calm gaze unsettled them immediately. Vance entered a moment later, clearly irritated to find Adrian standing in the middle of the café. He walked toward Mira with exaggerated confidence, pointing at a stack of napkins and claiming they violated some code. Adrian stayed silent, watching every move. Mira's shoulders tightened as she waited for another outburst. Instead, Adrian shifted slightly, positioning himself so Vance had to acknowledge him. Their eyes met with quiet intensity, and the café fell still. Mira sensed a shift in the balance, recognizing that Vance finally encountered someone who didn't respond to his authority with fear or hesitation. Vance stepped outside after his performance, expecting everyone to remain intimidated. Adrian followed him out, maintaining a calm pace. He didn't confront Vance aggressively, but his stance sent a message. Vance recognized the unspoken challenge and felt uncomfortable for the first time in a long while. He got into his cruiser without looking back, frustrated by the unexpected resistance. Adrian watched him leave, understanding that this would escalate matters. He returned inside to check on Mira and her staff, making sure they felt stable enough to continue serving customers without letting fear drive them out. After Vance's departure, customers felt more relaxed. Mira thanked Adrian quietly with a look, acknowledging the support she didn't ask for but needed. Adrian nodded and took a seat near the counter, observing the café with renewed purpose. He knew this was just the beginning. He contacted his friend to verify the cameras were working properly and to monitor any unusual activity in the area. Adrian made notes on his phone, tracking Vance's behavior patterns and recording any suspicious movements. He prepared himself mentally for the next phase, aware that exposing Vance would require precision and caution. Later that evening, Adrian met with a group of local business owners in a small workshop behind a hardware store. They shared stories about Vance's intimidation, each describing how they paid fees to avoid trouble. Some had tried resisting, only to face surprise inspections, vandalism, or fabricated charges. Adrian listened carefully, taking note of each detail. Their experiences matched the patterns he had seen on paper. By showing them parts of the evidence he collected, he gained their trust. The group agreed to support him quietly, hoping someone with enough influence could finally stop the chief's grip on Belmont. That night, Adrian returned to the café just before closing time. Mira was cleaning the counters again, trying to maintain routine despite the day's turmoil. Adrian offered a small gesture of reassurance with his steady presence. He scanned the street outside and noticed fewer officers lingering nearby. The cameras recorded increased activity earlier, but things were settling for now. Mira sensed he was planning something bigger, though he didn't share details. As she turned off the lights, Adrian stood at the door, ensuring she and Nolan made it to their car safely. The conflict had clearly reached a new stage. The next day, Vance showed up again, this time without warning. He pushed through the café doors with a look that suggested he wanted trouble. He walked around the room as if inspecting the air itself, ignoring customers and staff who grew uneasy at his presence. Mira stood behind the counter, bracing herself for whatever he planned. Adrian watched from a nearby table, noting how Vance's eyes narrowed at the sight of him. The chief approached Mira with the same forceful energy, trying to provoke her. Adrian stayed calm, but there was a clear shift in the atmosphere. Vance tried to intimidate Adrian with a series of long stares and slow movements, waiting for a reaction he could use later. Adrian didn't give him anything. He remained composed, unshaken by the attempt. This lack of response irritated Vance, who relied on fear to control others. Mira quietly observed the strange tension between the two men. She saw Vance lose confidence each time Adrian refused to acknowledge his display of power. Without saying a word, Adrian challenged the chief more effectively than anyone had managed in years, simply by refusing to be moved or impressed. Inside the café, Vance shifted his frustration onto Mira. He pointed at a corner of the room and acted as if she violated some new code. Customers watched in discomfort, unsure if they should leave or stay. Mira kept her voice steady and continued working, refusing to give him the reaction he wanted. Adrian took in every detail of Vance's behavior, understanding the chief was escalating because his authority felt threatened. Adrian's presence disrupted the routine. Vance built through pressure and fear. The chief stomped through the café, pretending to check things that didn't need checking. Mira tried to stay composed, but Adrian could see how exhausted she was by this ongoing cruelty. Her hands tightened around the tray she carried, and her steps became slower. Adrian realized she had reached her limit but continued pushing herself because she refused to let Vance win. He admired her strength and resilience. seeing the toll it took on her spirit. She worked through each task carefully, pretending her world wasn't under attack. Adrian knew she shouldn't face this alone, and watching her struggle made his resolve stronger than before. When Vance finished disrupting the cafe, he stormed outside with the same arrogance he walked in with. Adrian waited a moment, then stepped out behind him. The street was quiet, as Adrian positioned himself between Vance and the cruiser. His steps were controlled, giving just enough distance to avoid provoking an officer, but close enough to show intent. Vance turned sharply, startled to find him there. Adrian didn't make any sudden movements, but his steady stance delivered a message that didn't need words. Vance realized he wasn't dealing with another scared business owner. The two men stood facing each other, both refusing to look away. Vance felt the challenge even without a single spoken word. Adrian kept his posture relaxed yet deliberate, signaling he would not be pushed aside easily. Vance attempted to assert authority through his badge, but Adrian didn't flinch. His calm expression made Vance feel unsure, something he rarely experienced. The exchange ended only when Vance broke eye contact and moved to his cruiser. Adrian watched him leave, knowing this moment would shape the chief's next move. Nothing about the confrontation felt finished. Vance returned to his cruiser in a quiet frustration he couldn't hide. He hated being challenged, especially in public. He told himself Adrian was just another problem he could crush with enough pressure. Yet the calm in Adrian's face bothered him more than he wanted to admit. He sat behind the wheel, gripping the steering wheel tightly while staring at the cafe. His mind raced with ways to regain control. He didn't know Adrian's background, but he sensed a level of strength he hadn't faced in years. That realization made him even more determined to retaliate. Adrian watched the cruiser disappear down the street before walking back into the cafe. Mira stood near the counter trying to steady her nerves. Customers whispered among themselves, confused by the silent confrontation they had just witnessed. Adrian approached Mira with a gentle look, making sure she felt safe again. He didn't want to overwhelm her, but he understood she needed support. He checked the security cameras he installed earlier and reviewed the footage to confirm Vance's behavior had been recorded. It reassured him to see everything documented clearly, giving them an advantage they didn't have before. Adrian knew this situation required more than silent warnings. He reached out to a trusted friend who worked independently as an investigator. They reviewed footage of Vance's repeated harassment and matched it with similar incidents in other businesses. The patterns were undeniable. Adrian explained that this wasn't about revenge but stopping a dangerous cycle. His friend agreed to help organize the evidence, ensuring it could withstand scrutiny. Adrian planned to gather enough proof to expose Vance without dragging Mira into direct danger. Each step he took brought him closer to uncovering the full scope of corruption. That evening, Adrian returned to the cafe once more. He walked inside and nodded at the staff, who were still shaken from the earlier confrontation. He noticed Mira rubbing her forehead as she prepared receipts and cleaned surfaces. Adrian approached her slowly, offering silent reassurance. He didn't want to overwhelm her with what he was doing behind the scenes, so he simply stayed nearby as she worked. She didn't say much, but her shoulders relaxed slightly, showing she felt safer when he was around. The cafe seemed calmer whenever Adrian claimed a quiet corner of the room. As night settled, Adrian stepped outside to walk around the block. He studied each streetlight, alleyway, and patrol pattern with the sharp eye of someone who used to study escape routes and threats. He noticed two officers parked farther down the street, watching the cafe through dark windows. Their presence confirmed Vance was monitoring him closely. Adrian made a mental note of their license plate and behavior. He didn't feel intimidated. Instead, he saw this as information he could use later. Every detail mattered when dealing with a man like Vance. The next morning began with unusual stillness. Mira opened the cafe while Adrian sat across the street in his car observing again. Customers arrived early, hoping to avoid interactions with officers. Adrian saw the same unmarked vehicles circling the block, confirming his suspicions that Vance wanted to follow his movements. Mira didn't notice the added surveillance yet. She focused on serving customers with a peaceful smile, trying to keep her business alive. Adrian admired her resilience, but also understood how fragile the situation had become. He knew he had to stay close until he found a permanent solution. As Adrian watched, a delivery truck pulled up behind the cafe. The driver hesitated when he noticed the unmarked vehicle nearby. Adrian stepped out of his car and approached the truck calmly, giving the driver confidence to continue. He helped carry boxes inside, placing them near the kitchen. Mira thanked him while keeping her focus on customers, trying not to show how relieved she felt. Adrian's presence seemed to make everything run smoother. Customers who once rushed to leave stayed longer, sensing the cafe had regained some of its former peace. Mira noticed the change and felt grateful. Meanwhile, Vance sat in his office reviewing reports about Adrian. His deputies provided photos, but nothing explained the man's background. Vance grew irritated. He didn't like unknown variables. He demanded more details, pressuring his officers to dig deeper. Several officers avoided eye contact, unwilling to provoke Adrian indirectly. Vance, however, refused to let go of the obsession. He felt challenged for the first time in years and needed to restore control. He slammed his hand on the desk and ordered a more aggressive strategy to investigate Adrian's past, unaware he was pushing himself into deeper trouble. Throughout the day, more customers entered the cafe than Mira expected. The presence of regulars returning lifted her spirits. The cafe started to feel alive again, even if uncertainty shadowed the edges. Nolan, her son, helped deliver orders and noticed Adrian watching over the place quietly. Something about Adrian made him feel safe, as though the cafe had gained a silent guardian. Mira caught Nolan glancing at Adrian several times, sensing he was beginning to trust the man. She didn't push or explain. She allowed the connection to grow naturally, sensing how important it might become. Later in the afternoon, Adrian walked outside to meet his investigator friend. They stood near a quiet alley where they could talk uninterrupted. The investigator handed him documents linking Vance to larger financial misconduct. These records connected to previous complaints from other business owners. Adrian scanned each page, recognizing how significant the information could become. He thanked his friend and stored the documents carefully. He knew the evidence was strong, but releasing it without a plan would put Mira at greater risk. He needed to gather more details before making any public move against the chief. Adrian gave the documents a closer look once he was back in his car. The numbers aligned with transactions he recognized from past dealings. Vance had been hiding money through a series of accounts linked to shell companies. Adrian pieced together the connections, forming a clear path to expose the scheme. He remembered how similar operations collapsed when the right evidence reached the right people. With enough pressure, the truth could spread faster than Vance could contain it. Adrian felt the weight of responsibility, but also the determination to end the chief's reign over Belmont. Inside the cafe, Mira served customers with renewed energy. She noticed people laughing, eating slowly, and staying longer than usual. The improved mood gave her hope, yet she also sensed something building outside her awareness. She watched Adrian return to his usual seat, carrying a calm but firm presence. She knew he was working on something important, though she didn't know the details. She trusted that whatever he was doing, it wasn't meant to harm her. She felt grateful for his protection, even if she didn't fully understand why he cared so much about her situation. In the background, more business owners contacted Adrian quietly. They shared stories of being pressured by Vance and offered statements describing unfair inspections, vandalism, and threats. Adrian listened to each account with serious attention, recognizing the pattern he already suspected. These voices strengthened the case against the chief. He collected the information and organized it into categories, focusing on what would be most useful later. Every new piece of evidence chipped away at Vance's control. Adrian could feel the shift happening as more people chose to stand behind him instead of hiding in fear. That evening, Adrian walked Mira to her car as she closed the cafe for the night. The streetlights flickered above them while he scanned the area out of habit. Mira appreciated the gesture, feeling safer when he was nearby. They walked in quiet understanding, not needing to explain the growing tension around them. Adrian knew the coming days would become more intense as Vance reacted to his interference. Mira didn't ask questions, sensing he was carrying more than he admitted. She simply thanked him with a small nod before driving away, trusting him more with each passing day. Once Mira left, Adrian remained on the sidewalk, studying every shadow and passing car. He noticed a pair of headlights approaching slowly. The same unmarked vehicle rolled by, lingering near the entrance before moving on. Adrian memorized its movement pattern and plate number. He walked around the block, analyzing possible escape routes or safe spots in case Vance escalated again. His mind worked through scenarios quickly, old instincts guiding him. He understood that things were building toward a confrontation. He wasn't afraid, but he wanted to make sure Mira and Nolan wouldn't get caught in the crossfire. Vance spent the night pacing in his office, frustrated that he couldn't uncover anything solid on Adrian. He slammed drawers, muttered to himself, and scanned old police files that offered no answers. His deputies began avoiding him, sensing his agitation. Vance's grip on the department loosened as uncertainty seeped in. He hated losing control, especially to someone he didn't understand. He convinced himself Adrian must be planning something, and decided to act first. He drafted new orders that pushed the boundaries of legal authority, hoping to corner Adrian before he gained more influence in Belmont. By morning, tension in the city grew heavier. Patrol cars increased their rounds, and officers walked in pairs instead of alone. Adrian noticed this as he approached the café, recognizing the signs of a department preparing for conflict. Mira felt the shift too. She sensed eyes watching her every move as she opened the doors for customers. Adrian stepped inside with the same calm he carried daily, giving her reassurance. The staff felt steadier when he entered, as if his presence guaranteed a level of safety. Adrian assessed the room, understanding how close they were to a turning point. During the breakfast rush, a few customers approached Mira privately, offering quiet words of support. They thanked her for keeping her cafe open despite the pressure. These gestures meant more to her than they realized. She noticed Adrian observing the interactions with a faint expression of approval. The cafe felt different now, standing as a place where people found courage to speak. Mira felt stronger with each supportive comment, though she also understood that Vance wouldn't tolerate losing control of the narrative. The cafe's growing sense of unity posed a threat to the chief's authority. By late afternoon, Adrian sensed that Vance was planning something significant. He noticed officers positioned at new spots around town and an unusual number of patrol cars near intersections. Adrian sat near the cafe window studying their movements closely. Mira watched him, sensing he was preparing for something big. She didn't ask questions because she trusted his judgment. The atmosphere outside grew heavier with expectation. Adrian made a silent promise to protect Mira and Nolan from whatever was coming, even if it meant confronting the chief directly. The stage was set for a major shift in Belmont's balance of power. Vance grew restless after learning Adrian was spending time at the cafe almost daily. He couldn't understand why someone like that would care about a small business owner. Rumors started spreading within the department that Adrian might be connected to groups the chief wanted to avoid. Vance felt pressure closing in on him from every direction, and his frustration grew. He started calling in favors from people he once intimidated, trying to gather any detail he could use. His desperation made him careless, creating cracks in the authority he worked so hard to protect. Word reached Vance that Adrian had a connection to Mira's late husband. This information confused him and made him wonder how deep the relationship went. He ordered officers to dig deeper into Adrian's past, hoping to uncover something he could use to push him out of town. When reports came back empty or vague, Vance became even more irritated. His deputies avoided eye contact, sensing the growing instability. The lack of answers made Vance feel threatened. He convinced himself that Adrian's presence was a challenge to his power and that he needed to respond aggressively. Vance spent hours trying to understand why a man with Adrian's history would involve himself in a situation that didn't belong to him. He reviewed photos, reports, and recordings but found nothing that confirmed Adrian as an easy target. His confusion grew into suspicion, and that suspicion led to reckless decisions. Vance began pacing his office, talking through theories that made little sense. He felt Adrian's calm demeanor was a direct insult to his authority. Each unanswered question became fuel for his determination to destroy whatever influence Adrian was building in Belmont. The chief responded by sending undercover officers to follow Adrian around town. These officers parked outside businesses he visited and recorded every move he made. Adrian noticed the pattern right away but didn't react. He allowed them to follow him, giving them the sense that he didn't mind being watched. The more they monitored him, the more information he gathered about Vance's resources and tactics. Adrian recognized officers he had seen earlier and made mental notes about their routines. He understood Vance's style and knew the chief would become increasingly unpredictable the harder he tried to regain control. Adrian didn't change his behavior despite the surveillance. Instead, he moved through Belmont with the same steady rhythm, showing he wasn't intimidated. This calm approach disrupted the officers' attempts to gather meaningful evidence. They recorded hours of footage showing nothing suspicious, only reinforcing Adrian's mysterious nature. The officers sent frustrated reports back to Vance, who saw them as failures rather than the result of his misguided instructions. Adrian watched all of this quietly, understanding every attempt to corner him was revealing more about Vance than about himself. Patience became his greatest advantage. Adrian met with business owners around Belmont who had suffered under Vance's pressure. Many hesitated to speak at first, afraid the chief would retaliate if he found out. Adrian reassured them with his steady presence, and slowly they began sharing stories. He listened carefully as they described surprise inspections, sudden fines, and unexplained vandalism that followed refusal to pay protection fees. Each account added depth to the picture he was building. By the end of the meeting, several owners agreed to support Adrian's efforts quietly. They felt hope for the first time in years, believing change might finally be possible. During another meeting, Adrian received confidential information from a store owner who once cooperated with Vance out of fear. The owner provided documents showing how Vance manipulated city permits and used threats to secure personal gains. Adrian examined every page, recognizing patterns he saw before in corrupt operations. This information became an important piece of the puzzle, confirming suspicions he already held. Adrian thanked the owner and promised to keep their identity safe. He stored the documents safely and planned to connect them to the other evidence he collected. The case against Vance grew stronger each day. Adrian returned to the café with a new plan forming in his mind. He observed the customers, the staff, and the flow of activity with renewed focus. He mapped out steps in his head that could expose Vance without bringing harm to those around him. The cameras he installed continued recording quietly, offering additional protection. Mira noticed Adrian's thoughtful expression but didn't press him for details. She trusted he was working on something important. Adrian kept his thoughts to himself, knowing that sharing too much too early could bring unnecessary danger to Mira and Nolan. Mira noticed small improvements around the cafe as more customers returned. People who once avoided the place began stepping inside again, giving her the sense that life was beginning to shift. The atmosphere felt lighter, and conversations sounded more natural. She worked with energy she hadn't felt in months. Adrian observed from a corner table, pleased to see her smiling again. He knew this peace might not last long, because Vance wouldn't allow the cafe to regain popularity without responding. But for now, he appreciated the brief moment where Mira could work without fear dominating every thought. Adrian contacted a contractor who owed him a favor and arranged repairs for the cafe. The contractor arrived late one afternoon with tools and materials ready to fix the damage Vance had caused. Mira watched with surprise as broken shelves, chipped counters, and damaged doors began to look whole again. She didn't know who arranged the repairs, but she suspected Adrian had something to do with it. The cafe slowly regained its original charm. Seeing the transformation brought Mira a sense of hope she thought she had lost. Adrian remained quiet, letting the work speak for itself. Mira felt grateful for the changes around her but struggled to understand why Adrian was doing so much. She previously believed she had to face everything alone, and trusting others didn't come easily anymore. Yet Adrian's actions showed genuine care, not obligation. She found herself relying on his presence, even when he didn't speak. She watched him sit quietly in the café, observing the room with a protective awareness. Nolan noticed it too and started opening up to Adrian with casual comments and questions. Mira didn't discourage it, sensing the positive impact Adrian had on both of them. Adrian felt a growing responsibility toward Mira and Nolan. Their struggles reminded him of his own past, filled with moments where he wished someone would have stepped in. He watched Nolan help in the cafe with steady confidence and admired Mira's determination to protect her son. These small details fueled Adrian's motivation to see this through. He kept gathering information, building a case that could stand against Vance's influence. Adrian knew this fight wasn't only about justice but about restoring the safety Mira and Nolan deserved. His commitment grew stronger with every interaction he witnessed in the cafe. Meanwhile, Vance pressured his officers to find anything that could hurt Adrian's credibility. He demanded reports, rumors, and connections, but nothing pointed toward criminal activity. His officers grew tired of his constant demands, feeling the chief slipping into desperation. Some officers began questioning his choices privately, knowing they were being pushed into dangerous territory. Vance didn't notice their discomfort. He remained focused on destroying Adrian, convinced this stranger threatened his entire hold on Belmont. The more he pushed, the more he exposed his own instability to the department that once feared him unquestioningly. Each failed attempt to uncover Adrian's past made Vance more reckless. He began taking out his frustration on officers and business owners who didn't respond quickly enough. His aggressive behavior spread through the department, creating tension among officers who once supported him. Morale dropped as fear replaced loyalty. People started whispering in hallways, wondering if Vance was losing control. This environment made it easier for Adrian to gather quiet support. The chief's actions were building a case against himself without realizing it. Adrian simply waited and watched as Vance's leadership unraveled piece by piece. Adrian received support from people who once feared speaking out. They provided him with documents, photos, and statements describing Vance's intimidation tactics. Some described being forced to pay money, while others shared details of vandalism linked to Vance's officers. Adrian gathered everything systematically and organized it into categories. He paid close attention to connections between incidents, recognizing patterns of abuse. The information created a clear narrative that could be used to expose Vance when the time was right. Adrian kept all evidence stored safely, knowing one wrong move could jeopardize the progress he made. These new testimonies revealed deeper layers of corruption that extended beyond Belmont. Adrian examined the statements and traced connections to nearby towns. Some described trafficking routes used for illegal operations protected by the chief. Others mentioned bribes paid to higher officials. Adrian felt the case growing more dangerous but more solid. He recognized signs of a larger network that relied on Vance's leadership. Exposing it would require careful planning and coordination. Adrian took notes on which parts of the evidence needed verification and who could safely confirm them. The truth became clearer with every detail added. As the case against Vance grew, Adrian prepared a structured file containing the strongest evidence. He organized financial records, recorded incidents, and witness statements. Each piece supported the next, creating a complete picture of Vance's misconduct. Adrian shared parts of the file with trusted allies, ensuring the information wouldn't disappear if something happened to him. He worked late into the night inside his apartment, reviewing every document carefully. The plan was nearly ready. He just needed a moment where the evidence could create the greatest impact and leave Vance powerless to deny any of it. Back at the cafe, Mira noticed customers choosing her place over others again. People felt comfortable sitting inside without checking the door every few minutes. The cafe slowly regained its old rhythm. Mira felt lighter, sensing life returning to normal. She noticed Adrian watching the room with quiet pride, as if seeing his efforts pay off. Despite her relief, she remained aware that the situation wasn't resolved yet. She appreciated the calm, but didn't let herself believe it would last. Something told her Vance wasn't finished, and she trusted Adrian's instincts when he said the fight wasn't over. The atmosphere in Belmont began to shift. More residents noticed fewer officers patrolling aggressively. People talked quietly about the possibility of Vance losing his grip. These conversations spread through neighborhoods, giving people courage. Adrian observed these changes while staying alert to any sign of retaliation. He knew people gaining confidence posed a threat to Vance's control. He also knew Vance wasn't the type to let go without trying something drastic. Adrian prepared for the next step carefully, ensuring Mira and Nolan remained protected no matter what the chief tried next. Vance grew more paranoid as he sensed the city changing. He noticed officers questioning his orders and business owners losing fear of him. He saw Adrian entering the cafe without hesitation, as if he belonged there. This drove Vance into deeper frustration. He started lashing out at anyone he believed was disloyal, creating more enemies than allies. His once commanding presence became unpredictable, leaving officers unsure how to respond. Vance could feel his authority slipping away, but didn't understand how to reclaim it without revealing his desperation. The city he controlled for years started to turn against him. Adrian observed Vance carefully from afar, noticing signs of instability. He saw the chief pacing in public places, arguing with deputies, and raising his voice at officers in broad daylight. These small displays confirmed that Vance was losing control of his emotions. Adrian recognized the pattern of someone realizing their power was slowly disappearing. He noted these behaviors as additional evidence that could help their case later. Adrian maintained his calm posture, refusing to react to Vance's attempts to regain dominance. He knew the chief's downfall would come from his own actions, not from confrontation alone. Inside the cafe, Mira started feeling more secure. She began decorating the place again with small touches that made it feel warm. Customers appreciated her efforts and commented on how welcoming it looked. Nolan helped her hang new pictures on the walls, adding color to the once tired space. Mira worked with steady determination, grateful for the positive changes. She noticed Adrian watching with a faint smile as she arranged fresh flowers on tables. These moments gave her strength and reminded her that good could return even after weeks of fear. Still, she remained cautious, knowing the situation was fragile. Adrian and Mira shared quiet moments that strengthened their connection. They spoke briefly about her husband and how much he meant to her. Adrian listened with respect, understanding the depth of her loss. He didn't overstep, but he made sure she felt supported. Mira appreciated his presence more than she admitted aloud. She found comfort in his steady nature and the calm he brought into her life. These moments didn't erase the challenges ahead, but they created a sense of trust neither expected. Their bond grew naturally, rooted in shared purpose rather than forced understanding. Nolan grew more comfortable around Adrian, often asking him small questions or telling him about school. Adrian responded with patience, giving the boy a sense of security. Mira watched these interactions from behind the counter with growing warmth. Seeing her son trust Adrian meant a lot to her. She didn't try to define the relationship forming between them, she simply allowed it to unfold. The cafe felt more like a family space during these moments, reminding Mira of better times. She understood that Adrian's presence brought stability she desperately needed after months of intimidation. Vance eventually discovered Adrian's past connections and panicked. He learned that Adrian wasn't just some mysterious stranger, but a former mafia boss who once held serious influence. This revelation terrified him, not because of Adrian's past crimes, but because it explained his calm confidence. Vance realized he wasn't dealing with a regular citizen. He feared Adrian had resources far beyond his reach. This fear pushed him into urgent planning. He convinced himself the only way to regain control was to eliminate Adrian's influence completely, no matter what it took. The chief prepared for a dangerous counterattack. Vance became convinced that Adrian intended to destroy him, and this belief pushed him into a dangerous mindset. He gathered a few loyal officers into his office and gave them strict instructions to monitor Adrian's every move. He insisted they search for any excuse to arrest him, even if it meant stretching the truth. His officers exchanged nervous glances, sensing how reckless the order was. They followed it anyway, knowing refusal would bring consequences. Vance wanted to strike before Adrian gained more influence, unaware that his desperation was becoming more visible to those around him. Determined to hit Adrian where it hurt, Vance created a plan to frame him for illegal weapons transport. He arranged a suspicious vehicle filled with unregistered items and planted documentation intended to link it to Adrian. His officers prepared to pull over Adrian's car at the right moment, confident they would catch him off guard. What they didn't know was that Adrian anticipated this move. He recognized the pattern and predicted Vance's next step. When the officers attempted the stop, they found Adrian nowhere near the location they expected, leaving their operation exposed and poorly coordinated. Adrian's security team captured footage of the attempted setup, including officers mishandling the staged evidence. The footage clearly showed the flaws in the operation. Adrian watched the recordings and recognized the chief's desperation. He forwarded the material to trusted contacts who understood how to evaluate these incidents. The evidence turned the failed attempt into powerful documentation of corruption. Adrian didn't respond publicly, but he saved the files in multiple places. His careful preparation ensured that nothing Vance tried could be used against him. Instead, every attempt revealed more about the chief's misconduct. The failed operation created a cycle of panic in Vance's office. Officers whispered among themselves about how poorly the plan unfolded. Vance refused to admit fault and blamed his deputies for not executing the setup correctly. He slammed his fist on the desk and demanded they try again. But his deputies hesitated, realizing each mistake placed them deeper into illegal territory. Adrian observed all of this from a distance. He knew pressure would expose Vance faster than any direct confrontation. Every failed plan became another piece of evidence added to the growing case against the chief. Vance's frustration grew to a breaking point. He began moving money out of his hidden accounts. Desperate to protect himself, Adrian monitored these movements with help from confidential sources. The transfers confirmed Vance's guilt and connected him more deeply to the illegal networks. Adrian was mapping. He watched the financial trail form a clear line from Vance to the shell companies he used. These details strengthened the case even further. Adrian understood the value of timing, and he knew that waiting a little longer would cause Vance to expose even more of his own corruption. As Vance scrambled to hide evidence, Adrian organized everything into a complete package. He included financial transfers, recordings, statements from business owners, and footage from the failed setup. He stored copies in secure locations and sent portions to trusted allies. The case was nearly airtight. Adrian sat in his apartment reviewing the final details, understanding that this moment would define the future of Belmont. He didn't celebrate yet. He remained focused on protecting Mira and Nolan. He knew Vance would lash out when cornered, and he prepared for the worst. His instincts told him danger was close. Mira sensed a shift in Adrian's behavior. He became more watchful and deliberate, scanning the café with extra care. She recognized signs of an approaching storm, even if she didn't know the specifics. Adrian didn't want to worry her, but he couldn't hide the tension in his posture. Mira approached him with quiet concern, wondering if something had changed. Adrian gave her a reassuring look, though it didn't erase the worry she felt. She understood he was carrying a burden much larger than he shared. The uncertainty weighed heavily on her mind for the rest of the day. When Adrian realized how intense the situation was becoming, he knew Mira and Nolan could no longer remain exposed. He approached Mira privately near closing time and explained there might be danger directed toward them. He didn't go into detail, but he made it clear they needed to leave the cafe for a while. Mira hesitated, torn between staying strong and protecting her son. After a moment, she agreed, sensing Adrian's concern was genuine. Adrian arranged a safe place for them outside Belmont, relying on people he trusted completely. He insisted they stay hidden until things stabilized. Nolan didn't fully understand the situation, but he sensed the seriousness in Adrian's tone. He followed his mother without complaint. Adrian escorted them to a quiet cabin owned by an old friend who owed him a favor. The location was secluded but comfortable. Adrian ensured the place had everything they needed before stepping outside to check the perimeter. Mira watched him from the window, feeling a mix of fear and gratitude. Adrian promised he would handle the situation and return once the danger passed. She trusted him, though the weight of uncertainty made her heart feel heavier. Once Mira and Nolan were safe, Adrian returned to Belmont with a sharper focus. He met with his old allies, individuals who respected him from his past life, but now worked in legal and private sectors. They reviewed the evidence together, discussing ways to make the information undeniable. Adrian laid out the full plan, ensuring every step protected Mira from backlash. His allies respected his commitment and offered assistance wherever needed. For Adrian, this wasn't about reclaiming old power, but about correcting a wrong that had gone too far. They prepared to expose Vance with precision. Adrian and his allies mapped out Vance's entire operation. They traced how he used the police department to intimidate business owners and cover illegal dealings. They matched dates, financial transfers, and officer movements, creating a timeline that showed clear intent. Adrian reviewed every detail until the case was flawless. He understood that exposing a man like Vance demanded undeniable evidence. By the time they finished, they had built a structure so solid that even Vance's connections couldn't protect him. Adrian kept a copy hidden and sent another to his trusted attorney to prepare for public release. The attorney reviewed the evidence and confirmed it was strong enough to launch a full investigation. Adrian asked for advice on how to present the information without risking Mira's safety. The attorney recommended releasing the evidence through multiple channels simultaneously to prevent Vance from silencing any single source. Adrian agreed. They discussed how to involve reporters, officials, and community leaders in a coordinated effort. Adrian felt the plan forming into something unstoppable. He left the attorney's office with renewed determination, knowing that the final stage of the fight had arrived and that Vance was out of time. Meanwhile, Vance sensed something closing in around him. He noticed officers acting nervous and deputies avoiding his office. Rumors spread about unknown files circulating in the city. Vance demanded answers, but no one provided anything useful. His rising panic made him more aggressive. He stormed through the station, issuing commands that didn't make sense. Officers whispered behind his back, recognizing his loss of control. Vance felt betrayed by the same people who once followed him without question. His fear grew into paranoia, convincing him that Adrian was manipulating everyone. He prepared to strike first, even if it meant breaking the law. Vance planned an ambush to eliminate Adrian before the evidence reached the public. He gathered a group of officers he believed were loyal and instructed them to intercept Adrian's convoy at night. They chose a stretch of road just outside Belmont where visibility was limited. Vance imagined the operation going smoothly, restoring his dominance in one swift move. He didn't know Adrian had already predicted this tactic. Adrian prepared his convoy with experienced drivers and added surveillance equipment to track approaching vehicles. He traveled with caution, expecting Vance to attempt something reckless in a final attempt to maintain control. As Adrian's convoy approached the planned ambush site, his security team detected unusual activity ahead. They noticed vehicles parked at strange angles and officers hiding behind barriers. Adrian instructed his team to slow down and analyze the situation further. The convoy spread out strategically, reducing the chance of being boxed in. His team used thermal cameras to detect officers in the surrounding brush. Adrian remained calm, understanding the danger but trusting the experience of his crew. The officers positioned for the ambush shifted nervously, realizing the convoy hadn't fallen into the trap as expected. The ambush collapsed before it fully began. Officers tried to block the road, but miscommunication caused them to collide with each other instead. Patrol cars swerved, creating chaos and confusion. Adrian's convoy maintained control, avoiding damage. Some officers panicked and attempted to retreat, while others froze in place. The situation unraveled faster than Vance imagined. Adrian recorded the entire event through dash cameras and drones, capturing clear footage of officers preparing an illegal attack. He refused to confront the officers directly, choosing instead to let the failure speak for itself. The footage revealed everything he needed. After ensuring his team was safe, Adrian instructed the drivers to reroute through a safer area. He didn't want to escalate the situation with force. His priority remained Mira's safety and exposing Vance legally. The footage of the failed ambush showed officers acting without proper authorization, strengthening the case significantly. Adrian contacted his allies and forwarded the recordings. They confirmed the material was exactly what they needed. Adrian sat in the back of his vehicle, reviewing clips and recognizing how desperate Vance had become. He knew the final step was releasing the entire file publicly. The next morning, Adrian's allies prepared the evidence for broadcast. They coordinated with reporters, legal teams, and online platforms to ensure the information reached thousands simultaneously. Adrian remained calm as the release time approached. Mira and Nolan stayed safely hidden, unaware that the final stage of the plan was unfolding. Adrian double-checked every file one last time. He saw years of corruption laid bare across his screen. When everything was ready, he nodded to his attorney. The coordinated release began. The footage of the ambush appeared online alongside financial records, statements, and recorded incidents. Belmont residents woke up to a storm of information. Videos spread across social media showing officers preparing a staged attack. Financial files linked Vance to illegal money transfers. Statements described years of intimidation. Citizens watched with disbelief as evidence unveiled the truth. News stations scrambled to cover the story, replaying clips of Vance's misconduct. Reports quickly spread beyond Belmont into surrounding cities. People who once feared Vance now felt angry and betrayed. They demanded answers and accountability. The city's trust shifted instantly. Vance's once powerful reputation shattered under the weight of the evidence. Reporters gathered outside the police station, demanding a response from Vance. Officers inside struggled to maintain order, as phones rang non-stop. Deputies who once supported Vance distanced themselves immediately, refusing to be associated with the scandal. Vance locked himself in his office, overwhelmed by the public outcry. He refused to speak to reporters or answer calls from city officials. His authority evaporated in a matter of hours. Officers whispered about his downfall, unsure if they should continue following his orders. The truth spread faster than he could contain it, leaving him isolated and afraid. Residents began gathering outside the police station with signs calling for Vance's removal. People who once stayed silent now raised their voices loudly. They demanded a full investigation and swift action. Videos of the ambush played on large screens outside local shops, showing the truth to everyone passing by. Vance realized he could no longer control the narrative. The pressure grew as community leaders joined the protests, insisting on immediate accountability. The sound of the growing crowd reached into his office, reminding him how quickly power could shift. The city he once ruled now stood united against him. Council members held an emergency meeting to address the situation. They reviewed the evidence and agreed that immediate action was necessary. They contacted state officials, requesting outside investigators to take over the case. Within hours, the state announced a full suspension of Chief Harold Vance pending a thorough investigation. News spread rapidly. Officers were ordered to escort Vance out of his office while avoiding confrontation. Vance resisted verbally, but there was nothing he could say to stop the process. His badge was taken from him in silence, and he watched everything he built crumble. As Vance was escorted out, officers who once feared him now stepped aside without offering help. Some even looked relieved to see him removed. Investigators reviewed his records and found inconsistencies everywhere. Vance tried to argue, but the evidence spoke too loudly. Public records showed his unexplained wealth. questionable cases, and patterns of abuse. Vance felt exposed in a way he never imagined possible. He looked around at the station he once dominated, realizing no one stood behind him anymore. His downfall was complete, not through force but through truth and exposure from every angle. Meanwhile, reporters visited businesses around Belmont, gathering testimonies about Vance's intimidation. Many owners who feared speaking out now felt safe enough to share their stories. They described how Vance threatened them, demanded money, and used the department to control the community. These testimonies were broadcast alongside the evidence Adrian collected, shaping a complete picture of corruption. The public listened closely, shocked by how deep the abuse ran. People praised those who spoke up and thanked the unidentified individual who exposed everything. Adrian watched the coverage quietly, knowing the truth had finally reached every corner of Belmont. City leaders gathered again to discuss the future of the department. They announced plans to appoint an interim chief known for integrity and community service. Residents welcomed the decision with cautious optimism. Officers pledged to rebuild trust with the community. As the news spread, relief washed over Belmont. The city finally saw hope beyond corruption. Mira, still in hiding with Nolan, received updates from Adrian's allies. She felt an overwhelming sense of relief. The danger that once seemed impossible to escape was fading. She began to imagine returning home, finally free from the weight that controlled her life. State officials released an official notice confirming Vance's suspension, and investigators sealed his office for evidence processing. Files were removed, computers logged, and every document traced. The process unfolded publicly, leaving Vance with no chance to hide. His influence vanished overnight. People gathered outside the station, watching him sit on the steps with a look of disbelief as officers carried out boxes. The man who once terrified the city appeared powerless. Adrian observed quietly from a distance, satisfied that Mira and Nolan were safe. The weight of the conflict slowly eased from his shoulders as the truth prevailed. Public reaction grew stronger as more details of Vance's crimes surfaced. News stations aired interviews with residents who once feared speaking about his cruelty. People expressed relief and anger in equal measure. The city of Belmont took its first steps toward healing. Officers who stayed silent out of fear now stepped forward with additional information, fully cooperating with investigators. Adrian saw a shift in the community, noticing how people walked through town with newfound confidence. The fear that once spread through the streets was being replaced with hope. The city began rebuilding itself from years of intimidation. Financial investigators tracked Vance's hidden accounts, revealing transactions he could no longer deny. Each transfer pointed back to operations he tried to conceal, forming a clear trail of corruption. Vance attempted to explain the money, but no reason could justify the evidence. He faced mounting charges and lost his remaining supporters. Adrian watched from afar, allowing the legal system to take its course. He didn't need to intervene. The truth had already done its job. With every update, Adrian felt the case closing tighter, ensuring Vance would never regain a position of power or intimidate anyone again. Belmont's residents thanked the unnamed source responsible for exposing Vance. Although they didn't know Adrian's role, they appreciated the mysterious figure who helped them reclaim their city. Businesses reopened with lighter spirits, and people greeted each other with genuine warmth. Mira's café became a symbol of resilience in the center of town. Its reopening drew a steady flow of customers eager to support her. Adrian saw the community coming together, grateful the city finally felt safe. He knew the battle wasn't just about removing one corrupt man, but restoring balance to a place that needed it desperately. Officers who once felt trapped under Vance's control stepped forward with stories that confirmed the extent of his reach. They described threats, forced orders, and punishments for resisting. Investigators documented every detail, adding to the mountain of evidence. Adrian listened to these accounts quietly, understanding how deep the corruption ran. He felt relieved that people finally felt safe enough to speak. The officers' testimonies painted a clearer picture of the environment Mira had endured. Adrian realized the victory wasn't his alone, but belonged to every person brave enough to share the truth. As more evidence surfaced, Vance realized he had nowhere left to run. Investigators tracked his attempts to flee, intercepting him before he could leave Belmont. He was taken into custody without ceremony, surrounded by officers who had once obeyed him. Adrian saw the footage online, noting the defeated look in Vance's eyes. The man who once controlled an entire city now sat handcuffed in the back of a patrol car. Adrian didn't celebrate, he simply acknowledged the closure. Justice had reached the man who believed he was untouchable, and Belmont no longer feared his shadow. Adrian watched the news coverage quietly, knowing the worst had passed. Belmont began re-establishing trust in law enforcement under new leadership. Community meetings were held to discuss how to rebuild the department. People spoke openly about their experiences, feeling empowered for the first time in years. Adrian appreciated the progress, but kept his distance, understanding his involvement needed to remain in the background. He didn't want attention. His purpose was to protect Mira and expose Vance, not gain recognition. He prepared to step away as the city found its footing again. Once investigators confirmed the city was safe, Adrian contacted Mira to let her know she could return. She packed her belongings at the cabin with relief, eager to go home. Nolan felt excited to return to familiar surroundings. Adrian drove to the cabin to escort them back, ensuring they traveled safely. Mira looked out over the quiet landscape one last time before stepping into the car. She felt a mix of gratitude and nerves, unsure how Belmont would feel after everything she endured. Adrian reassured her with his steady presence as they made their way back into town. When they arrived at the café, Mira stepped out of the car and paused, taking in the sight of customers sitting inside again. The place felt alive, filled with warm conversation and the smell of fresh pastries. Mira entered with Nolan close behind, both greeted by familiar smiles. Employees rushed to welcome her back, relieved she was safe. Mira walked behind the counter with a renewed sense of pride. Adrian stood near the entrance and watched the cafe return to life. Seeing her safe inside her own business made all the risks he took feel worth it. Nolan explored the cafe with excitement, checking shelves, tables, and corners to make sure everything was intact. He spoke with the staff, asking questions and offering help wherever needed. Mira watched him with a smile, feeling grateful for his resilience. Adrian noticed Nolan glancing at him with a familiarity that had grown over time. The boy respected him, not because he was powerful, but because he had protected his mother. Adrian nodded at him gently, recognizing the trust they built. Mira felt peace, knowing Nolan saw Adrian as someone he could rely on. Adrian took a quiet moment to consider his place in Belmont now that the conflict had ended. The city was healing, and Mira no longer needed protection from Vance. He questioned whether his presence might attract new threats, given his past. While he cared deeply for Mira and Nolan, he knew the kind of life he lived carried risks that could resurface. He didn't want to bring danger back into their world. Adrian weighed his thoughts carefully, understanding that leaving might be the best way to protect the peace Mira worked so hard to rebuild. Mira sensed a shift in Adrian's demeanor. Despite the safety returning to Belmont, Adrian seemed distant, as though preparing for something she couldn't see. She approached him near the window and studied his expression. He offered a calm smile, but she recognized the heaviness behind it. Mira didn't press him with questions. Instead, she simply stood beside him, acknowledging the bond they formed. She felt grateful for everything he had done, and saddened by the possibility that he might pull away. She understood he carried a past that weighed heavily on his choices, even now. That evening, as the cafe quieted down, Adrian stepped outside and walked through Belmont. He wandered past familiar places he observed during the conflict. Each street carried memories of tension and strategy. He watched people walking without fear, families enjoying the evening air, and business owners closing shops with easy smiles. The city felt different now, lighter. Adrian took in the calm with a sense of closure. He knew he didn't belong to this peaceful rhythm. His life had been shaped by darker paths, and though he tried to change, he feared bringing harm to those he cared about. Adrian drove to a small memorial stone near the edge of town. It marked a place where Mira's husband once saved his life during the raid so many years ago. Adrian stepped out and stood before the stone, letting memories rise. He placed his hand gently on the edge of the monument, acknowledging the debt he could never fully repay. He whispered a quiet promise in his mind to keep Mira and Nolan safe, even if it meant watching from a distance. The memory of that night remained clear, reminding him how much one act of courage could change a life. As Adrian stood at the memorial, the weight of his past and the uncertainty of his future settled around him. He knew the connection he formed with Mira ran deeper than he intended. Protecting her was never just a favor, it was something he felt in his core, yet he also understood that staying might bring old enemies back into her world. He wrestled with the desire to remain close and the knowledge that leaving might be the safest choice. After a long moment of quiet reflection, he made a decision that felt both painful and necessary. Back at the cafe, Mira worked the evening shift with a renewed sense of security. The atmosphere was calm and customers lingered comfortably. Yet she sensed something missing. She glanced at the door repeatedly, hoping to see Adrian walk through. Her staff noticed her looking but didn't mention it. As the street outside grew quieter, Mira stepped to the window and watched the passing cars. She felt a subtle ache in her chest, realizing she hadn't seen Adrian since earlier in the day. She wondered where he went and whether he planned to return. As hours passed, Mira wiped the counters slowly, still watching the door. She knew Adrian often disappeared when he needed time to think, but something felt different this time. She sensed a goodbye she hadn't heard. She walked to the back of the cafe, checked the storage room, and returned to the front with a lingering sense of unease. Adrian's absence settled into the space like a quiet truth. She understood he carried burdens he didn't share, and she feared those burdens might be pulling him away from the peace he helped restore. Meanwhile, Adrian stood outside Belmont, looking at the city from a distance. He kept his car parked on a hill overlooking the lights below. This was the place he used to clear his mind. He watched the glowing windows of Mira's cafe, imagining her working the late shift. He wanted to be near her, but he also knew his presence could complicate her future. He didn't want his past to follow her, or put Nolan at risk. His decision felt heavy, but he believed it was the right choice. He started the engine quietly and prepared to drive away. Inside the cafe, Mira approached the window again. She looked out at the street while holding a warm mug in her hands. She felt Adrian slipping away, even without seeing him leave. She thought about everything he had done, every quiet gesture, every protective moment. She wondered whether he understood how much his presence meant. The cafe lights reflected in the glass, blending with the passing patrol cars outside. Mira knew this peace existed because of him. Though she wished she could thank him properly, she also understood that Adrian made choices based on protecting others, not seeking comfort. Mira closed the cafe for the night and locked the door with a quiet sense of acceptance. She looked back at the tables, the counter, and the warm lights, knowing Adrian's influence touched every inch of the space. She stepped onto the sidewalk and breathed in the night air. Belmont felt safe again. She allowed herself a moment of gratitude and walked toward her car. Thoughts of Adrian followed her with every step. She hoped he found his own peace, wherever he went. She carried a soft ache in her chest, but it was mixed with appreciation, not regret. Adrian drove through the outskirts of Belmont, passing the familiar landmarks he watched during the investigation. He knew the city no longer needed him. Mira was safe, Nolan was thriving, and the community stood united. The conflict that led him here had ended. His role was complete. He took one last look at the skyline before turning onto the main road. The headlights stretched before him like a path toward something unknown. He didn't know where he would end up next, but he accepted the uncertainty. He carried Mira's strength with him like a quiet reminder of what mattered. Back in town, Mira settled into her routine again. She opened the cafe early each morning, greeted familiar faces, and worked with newfound confidence. The stress that once controlled her life was gone. Customers returned steadily, grateful for her resilience. Nolan helped before school, arranging pastries and setting tables. Mira adjusted small decorations around the cafe, making it more welcoming than ever. Though a soft sadness lingered when she thought about Adrian, she focused on the positive changes he brought into her life. She continued building the home she once feared losing. Belmont slowly healed. The new interim chief worked openly with the community, rebuilding trust step by step. Officers attended neighborhood meetings and listened to residents' concerns. The city felt lighter with every passing week. Mira watched the transformation from her cafe window, proud of the role her story played in pushing for change. Customers shared stories about improvements around town, expressing gratitude for the fresh start. Mira felt hopeful. She recognized the progress and welcomed it with open arms. For the first time in a long while, she felt her city was truly her home again. Though Adrian never returned, Mira carried a quiet understanding of why he left. She remembered the calm strength he brought into her life, and how he acted without expecting anything in return. She knew his path was shaped by choices she might never fully understand, but she believed he left to protect the peace she had regained. Each time she brewed a fresh pot of coffee or placed pastries in the display case, she felt his presence in the quiet strength she found within herself. Belmont moved forward, but she kept the memory of his sacrifice close. As the cafe thrived again, Mira often looked toward the road leading out of Belmont. She imagined Adrian traveling to some distant place, carrying the weight of his past yet guided by the decency he rediscovered helping her. She didn't need to see him to know he made the world safer in ways few understood. She wiped the counter, smiled at customers, and felt grateful for the man who defended her when no one else dared to stand up. Her life moved forward, shaped by the courage of a mafia boss who walked into her cafe and changed everything.